Hello, Jesse and Morgan. Hello. All right. Welcome to the meeting. Amanda canceled the Cognition Futures meeting for Wednesday, Thursday. We've been moving it around, but I think no one could make it at the time that we wanted to do it, so we didn't do it this week. And then we had our Friday meeting, which was always good. And we got a couple of demos, actually, people showing their work. So it looks pretty good so far. And hopefully we'll get some good work done. So do we have updates from people? Do they want to talk about what they've done the past week?
I guess my video's on, so I'll go first.
Okay.
So I've been putting together a very simple collective cognition demo using Mesa and Python. I think maybe Amanda is the only person at this meeting right now I haven't already talked to this about. It's basically just, you're at a dinner table and somebody says, hey, could you pass me the peas? And so then everyone works together without talking about it to get them the peas, or maybe talking about that, I don't know. But so I've been working a lot on that and trying to integrate different models into the model, or different approaches. So right now it uses an automata-based kind of a more canonical approach, and I've been working on using a decentralized, partially observable Markov decision process approach. And Amanda, you were talking about this, which is super exciting. I was going to try to implement a free energy principle or active inference approach. So that's next on the list. I've also been reading through that book, and it's very interesting. Palpate, it calls it.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, there's going to be some crossover there, I think. So, Amanda, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go ahead. So Morgan's been helping me learn, I guess, like the basic technical skills that I need to learn more about different kinds of EEG analysis. I found a paper a few weeks ago that I was very interested in, and now I'm actually learning how to, do the work instead of just read the paper and think about the concepts.
Yeah.
So in another reading group, we started the active inference book. We just started it. It's been fine. It's only philosophers in the group, and we don't really know what we're talking about. But it's been interesting so far. Yeah, I think that's it.
Well, that's good. Very good. Thank you. Yeah, I have that book too. Everyone has that book. The active inference lab is a place you might be interested in, joining their Discord. Daniela and myself are involved in that, and they always have a lot of really good stuff come up in there. It's run by Daniel Friedman, who's a person who does similar things to what I'm doing here with these participatory online labs, and he does they do a lot of everything active inference and free energy principle, and so it's just a lot. It's very, you have to really kind of spend some time getting into it and understanding it, but it is very difficult. There are a lot of concepts that kind of run into one another, and you have to have those all together. You have to think about those all together before you can really kind of get in. But it's I think it's well, like I said before, the criticism might be that it's a kludge of ideas that come together, but it's also, there are a lot of parts to the brain. Brain's very complicated, so you just have to kind of, maybe what we need is kind of a theory of kind of a theory of parts, maybe. But
and Active Inference Lab this week, hosted Carl Friston talking about his paper on free energy principle. Simple but not too simple.
Great.
So yeah, and they've had him for 3 weeks now.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
they do have.
I mean, it's a.
Oh, go ahead.
I was
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, it's like when they do a paper, they're gonna revisit it, and yeah. So it's been great to watch. I mean, it's tough material.
Yeah.
So, but with Active Inference Lab, you can sign up and participate, in the conversation, and yeah. So that it's been really helpful to catch his Carl and was Thomas talking about their own work.
Yeah. Yeah, they have the YouTube channel as well, so that's always a resource. So why don't you go next, Morgan?
Yeah. So I tried to catch the Active Inference Lab this week, and prepare for a conversation. So that's been great. My Active Inference book just arrived.
Oh yeah.
So I'm ready for So I also catch the palpate reference, in the sense of like does that make it clear? Yeah. As it comes to Carl's rating, but so we've I wish we could say we've been doing nonlinear time series analysis. At this point, we are installing computational Python still.
Okay.
So it's like day 3. We're still trying to take a Mac and make it into a workstation. Well, at least with the right software and things.
Yeah.
But this is, so what we do have is we can reading in EEG data from the Child Mind Institute. So this is this very large data collection effort from a nonprofit, Child Mind Institute, that's focused on kind of future psychiatric research by collecting data now, even if they don't know how necessarily to process it. So if anybody would like to join us and has their, getting their laptop, or and is interested in getting their laptop up to speed for running various computational things, you can join us. And so this is getting Anaconda installed, getting in the case of a Mac, getting a Homebrew installed to deal with any other dependencies, and and I've what I really want to play with. I mean, previously I've used PyUnicorn for doing recurrence network analysis and these kinds of techniques, but I'm really interested in using Steve Brunton's deep time package that is really used more specifically in his own research is focused on fluid mechanics, but in this case it's a general purpose system identification tool. And in particular, and this is what I've also been trying to emphasize, Amanda, is the nonlinear time series analysis is it's a great technique, with problematic interpretation, but in particular that handling the real multi-channel data that we have is not something, integrating the high spatial data that we have in the sense of the large multi-channel is something to think about in terms of how best to utilize all the multi-channel data. a lot of EEG researchers will just subsample and take a small sample and potentially even one channel from a whole head system. And if you want to get at the interpretation problems that you have with these techniques, compute it for all 128 channels, and then see. It's like, okay, now which one should you really be focused on? So really interested in both new approaches to that. In other words, stealing from Navier-Stokes people, and seeing what else we can do. In this case, Child Mind Institute is more a functional data set. So you've got a lot of task data, whereas anyway, the Steve Brunton work, he continued, at least the physics and math behind some of these techniques, and great explanations. So enjoyed those. The tissue talks and other meetings are still going on and things. I've been continuing to drop more, not so much organoid references, but references related to the analysis of the organoids in terms of single cell genomic analysis, catching more, or at least getting up to speed in terms of what are the analysis tools to use for that kind of analysis. So I don't know if you saw the SC Design 3 and some of that work. So I think that's There's something else might come up, and then of course for the meeting yesterday, I was reviewing, as I said, the Han Tang collective intelligence paper, and had really gone through checking all the references in that paper. It's a survey, right?
Yeah.
But really focused on the particular tools that were used for really massive multi-agent simulations, right? So that in other words, getting at the number of agents that societal or kind of cultural emergent behavior would happen, and and with a certain emphasis on being able to do that efficiently with, say, a single computer.
Yeah.
It's the Fei-Fei Li evolutionary computational work, is super interesting. It was designed to run on 16 times 72 processors. Yeah, so that's a big simulation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
But,
yeah. So are you you're just doing this kind of informally with Amanda? You're kind of teaching her the different methods and getting things set up?
Yeah. There's other people here in San Francisco too who are interested in Child Mind Institute data. So it's useful. There's a lot of interest in this data set. And it's rare to find these kinds of numbers, in terms of the number of subjects. So that's particularly cool. And it also has such rich MRI data associated with it, and it's Child Mind Institute, so it's got this incredible psychological workup on each child. That the really amazing thing from a psychiatric research perspective is the language assessments that you have on these kids, in addition to all this rich imaging data and kind of biobehavioral workups that they've got too. So it's a great data set. In terms of the EEG, I keep saying it's a really underutilized data set in the sense of, if anybody processes this data set, they focus on the fMRI.
Yeah.
And because it's easier, not because it's better.
Right.
And so there's, still think there's some real research opportunities there, but getting familiar with M&E is, or certainly with Neurotech X, we're trying to get you familiar with M&E and scikit-learn are kind of like our two, main go-to packages for processing that you're kind of leaning on. And in that respect, we're also trying to match kind of what the best practices for the fMRI researchers too, in terms of what they're going to be familiar with.
Yeah.
So to some degree, we'll use NiLearn as well. I mean, or certainly, NiLearn and some of the packages associated with it are great, certainly, to learn from in terms of how to utilize ML for neuroimaging analysis. But yeah, so we're definitely pushing ahead with that analysis, even if the nonlinear, it won't just be the nonlinear time series part, just because, as it says, you can get those results, and then it's still a difficult interpretation
right.
of what to make of this. It's like I've got these differences in fractal dimensionality. Yeah. Okay, now what's that translate into? And this is, sorry, I think I'm gonna have to let the dog in. But if what like explainable AI or interpretable AI, you really still need to do a lot of unpacking to make that useful in any way.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get the dog.
Okay. So yeah, I think that I know that we have, the reason I was interested in this data set was because we have this, we've tried to do this in the past, and we've done this with varying degrees of success, but to have actual data sets that people can analyze. So NeuroMatch has data sets that they make available to people when you do the course, and if you're doing the computational neuroscience course, you'll have access, the projects will have access to a number of data sets. And so, whatever project, if you take the NeuroMatch computational neuroscience course, you'll form a group, and then you'll get assigned some data set. And the data set will be, set up in a Colab notebook, and you'll be able to do analysis. You'll be able to pull numbers out of it. And then the whole idea of that kind of project is to answer a set of questions. And it's a very simple, project. But my thinking here is that, maybe we could use these kind of things. We could go to this data set that we were just talking about, and kind of pull together some tutorials, some ways so people can interact with the data and learn some skills. And then we can also bring maybe some of those NeuroMatch data sets. I don't know if we can, I guess we can access them, or something similar. And that would definitely be another arm of education here, is to teach people how to do different types of analysis. But the best way to do that isn't kind of one-on-one. It would be kind of like scaling it up to some sort of set of tutorials, or putting in, like lesson plans where here's how you walk through this step by step. But that's something that we can do. One-on-one is good too, because if you have Amanda, what's your background in data analysis? Have you done a lot of it in the past, or?
No, in undergrad I worked on some studies that used EEG data, but I mostly just did pre-processing, and then some questionnaire stuff. So I had very little experience with this. I had some Python experience, and I'd used MATLAB, but I was pretty unfamiliar
Yeah, it's
Sorry,
pretty specialized. Oh, yeah. Well, I was just pointing out that, like, it'd be good to have this distilled down to like a tutorial style thing, because I was talking about the neuromatch data sets that exist and how they use, they have data sets from different places that they've developed Colab notebooks for. And so analyzing those having it set up so that people can just go in and access. I mean, you don't want them just to throw anything together, but to have like something where people can access the data and then, ask questions about it. So, I mean, there are different ways that might be useful more generally. I don't know who else in the group is interested in that, but that's something to think about.
Yeah, so I've signed up for the Neurodata Without Borders user days. That's end of July. So, and that will include certainly looking at Dandy Archive and those data sets, and I think that's what NeuroMatch is using, right?
I think that may be one of the things they're using, but I think they'd use
one of the things. Yeah.
Well, they have a couple of data sets where they've got like I think they actually started with data sets from people they knew, so they
Sure.
they did stuff from Genelia, they did stuff from some other places, but they had, but that that's something that they say, well, you can bring your own data set, and it's like how many students and groups are going to have their own data set to give into the throw into a project. But yeah.
Right. Well, as well as some of these data sets are so hard to collect, right? And so these it's a real opportunity to play with, I would say, really difficult to collect data. I was just gonna also say, reading Patrick Minolt's blog. He's got a section on dimensionality reduction techniques, and that was one of the things that I was really hoping to get out of working with the Neurodata Without Borders group, is playing with some of the tools and the techniques that they have implemented from evasive work, and just wanted to that xcore.net is I think his blog, but yeah, so check out the dimensionality reduction. I think he's getting some of those from a tool called Elephant, but that was these are the kind of things, if we're interoperable with the data, then tools from different areas should work on the same data set, or we should be able to try this out. So interesting to see with Dandy Archive data sets, or maybe large multi-channel high density EG data sets.
Yeah, that would be great. There's a lot to learn there. And this is something that it's something that you have to have access. You used to have access to a lot of this. You had to have you'd have to divine the data set. You'd have to rub a crystal ball, and then now we have all these tools that you can use to get them up and running pretty quickly. But that's something that I've found that is a stumbling block, though, with some of the NeuroMatch projects, is that you have to figure out, especially people aren't expert in using something like a Colab notebook. How do you pull a variable and how do you get it to run? And so this is something that, making that easier for people, lowering that barrier to entry is, I think, important, because it gives people a new opportunity to, look at data and actually do things with it. Because you can't really, give people a list of things to go get for you, and then there's a sort of a free exploration aspect to data analysis that needs to happen, I think. So
I tried to emphasize what we could do on a laptop, and what we're really just kind of prototyping to make into a container that we would then use to actually process the data. Because, I'm not sure about Dandy Archive in general, but a lot of the neuroimaging data sets, it's just standard practice because of the size that nobody has 200 terabytes, accessible from their laptop. These data sets are just too big. So there has, Amanda's looking at, you've done some of the tutorials, gone through some of the ReaperNim ABCD tutorials. And that's, so that's this kind of comparable Child Mind Institute data set from NIMH. One that's also a little bit more like what Bradley's talking about, in the sense that part of the problem is that I'm not sure if we can access ABCD, whereas we can just go to this FTP site and access Child Mind Institute data. But again, we wouldn't have the space to download it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna check back with I'd worked with Open Science Grids like a long time ago, but things, because data sets like Child Mind Institute are available on the web, we should be able to process them with Open Science Grids. It should be easy to process. The only time that you kind of sometimes need extra resources is really for storage.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And we've done a lot of stuff with OpenWorm and DevaWorm with secondary data sets and getting those set up and running. And it's been a challenge, especially working with containers and things like that. It's distributing that to other people. It's not so much getting it to work on your machine, but getting it to work, distributing it to people and saying, here's a container, install it, and then you can do these data analysis things. And it's always a challenge to try to get it to work for everyone. So yeah, that's something, but I think the payoff there is high if we can get it to work and do something interesting with it. So why don't we put a pin in this and see what we can do, and just kind of keep thinking about it and working on it a little bit and seeing what we're doing practically. Maybe working with Amanda, you can make a list of things that work well and don't work well in terms of getting the data set up and running, and we can see what happens from there. This is exciting. I like this because I know we haven't talked about it in a while, but we try to make data analysis kind of a core thing. So okay. Jesse, are you there?
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm a bit recovering from some things, but I'm all right. Cognition Futures didn't quite work out this week. If there's an alternate time to meet at some point soon, that'd be great, but I know everybody's got stuff to do. The Google Summer of Code meetings are really interesting. I'm happy that they're going the way that they are, and I wanted to follow up. I don't know what you heard while I was traveling yesterday or not, but basically I was saying I really like the discussions, and I'll be reaching out to some people to have follow-up discussions because there's a lot of good stuff there. Outside of that, the people, I think everybody has filled out that Google Summer of Code blog post that I mentioned, so that can probably be published this weekend. I'll show that a bit later. That was cool. People have done that. Since the last meeting, I've done a little bit. I've pushed a little things few things forward with some of the frontier map, I guess prototype demo, but also just the one for Cognition Futures. I think there's been a lot of things going on in the background in terms of some organizational stuff and admin stuff and shifting around. You know, when you make a project somewhat visible, there's a lag, because you can't, if you put anything into concrete reality, you have to change it. That can create a bit of a lag in terms of, you know, everything else. So I'm kind of dealing with that. But that's, you know, things are going on that front. Plot Twisters is doing a few things that are, I think there's let me see here. There's I think Jenny is going to this Connected Life conference, which is Connected Life 2022, Designing Digital Futures, provides an engaging forum for interdisciplinary network of researchers, designers, policymakers, and futurists from across the globe to critically engage how we shape our digital futures. So Jenny and Avery have been working a lot on finishing sort of the map to Twisterland, and they've been like actually drawing it out and making some of it like giving this sort of mental space a home in a I'm using my air quotes, but like in a physical reality, or at least sort of a map of it. So they've been working on that and that's been their thing to do this week. I'm not quite a designer, but I've been involved in a lot of discussions about like conceptually how do they do that. They're deep in the world building phase of what that is, and it's kind of a shift from, you know, they've been doing a lot of research on some of the things that we've well, I guess not quite as much, but things that, like, you know, some of the psychology and sociology, but they're kind of in like design phase right now, and I think Jenny's realized that she really likes a lot of design stuff, so that's good for her and good for the group, for Plot Twisters. But yeah, but the main thing for my week was I was on a work trip to basically Connecticut, and I spent time in Hartford. Has anybody been to Hartford, Connecticut? You've been there, Brian? How would you describe Hartford, Connecticut?
What was it?
I was downtown. My hotel was like downtown, and it was such a weird contradiction because I've grown up in around Albany, upstate New York, and I'm super familiar with the upstate New York, which is that sort of like classic big space rural vibe, and then you find that outside, you know, in places in Massachusetts that aren't Boston and, you know, Connecticut and New England, or whatever you want to say, the Northeast. There's sort of the Northeast rural thing going on. But Albany is much more compact, but like feels like a city. Albany is literally, it is often joked as not even a little brother, but like it is small. Albany is Smallbany compared to like New York City. So everything's always compared to the city when you're in New York, even if you're one of the people who always knows that New York City doesn't compromise all of New York State. There's a whole other, like, you know, big chunk of stuff. Anyway, Hartford, I was really curious what your reaction is going to say, and Bleak fits because Hartford felt so weird to me because huge towering structures of like well built out, like it almost feels futuristic but not. Like it's like this giantly spaced city with big, like the walkways were like 2 or 3 times a normal walkway and done with like this nice bricks. Like it's really well done, but there was nobody there. and I'm mystified by by the experience of walking around there, and like it was I didn't spend a whole lot of time there, but it was kind of bizarre for me. I'm still have a little bit learning how to process it. Um, so um, I think I told one of my friends just today that it felt a bit like a giant futuristic city ghost town, and I'm like, it made me a bit uncomfortable because it reminded me of all the things from upstate New York that I wanted to leave and go to Boston towards. But it was almost like it was like, oh well, here's a giant new city that's has giant buildings and super high, and compared to Boston, the buildings at least in downtown are like so much higher and taller than Boston. Anyway, this is trivial stuff, but um, work trip was okay. I was going to, but did not fully. We, if I may do a high level VR um, discussion today if we have time. I was going to give one at earlier this week, but we didn't. It didn't quite work out because we were going to use. We thought one of the Mindvr, which is a very simple headset, mostly for seniors. We thought we had one of those things on site, but we ended up not. And then I was kind of asked to bring down some stuff, but for one of the things for walk-in VR, you kind of need to have a computer set up and a Connect and a PC, and it was like I can't bring all that down to this situation, so it kind of was a bust in terms of physical experience. So I didn't end up not presenting this, but I basically modified the slides a little bit, and I might show them later, just to give people a sense of some like VR stuff, kind of geared at accessibility. And I did mention Cognition also. Actually, thank you, Morgan, for kind of hooking me up with Andreas, and I reached out to them. It was interesting talking to them because they were a little bit like, it sounded like they weren't really ready to give us a device or sell us a device. And then the person from Cognition was like, oh, well, Andres, is it Andreas? I think it's Andreas, right?
Yeah, Andreas.
Andreas. Then they're like, oh, well, Andres, we're looking maybe at having Andreas fly out and give you a demo in person. And I was like, I don't think we're quite ready for that. So it was a little bit, it was a bit hard to read how to deal with that. So we kind of just let it be for now. But potentially in the future, I wish things were a little bit different this week because I couldn't really read the room about receptivity to some things. Needless to say, we can talk more about that later. But
Yeah.
when talking about demo or deploy, sometimes when you're demoing stuff, like you gotta know when to shoot your shots and know when to hold them, because if you shoot your shots at the wrong time, you'll look silly. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You're shooting and the target's not there. You're just like, what are you doing? Like, nice moves, but what are you aiming at, son? And you don't want that sometimes. So I played a bit on the conservative side today, or this week, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It probably also didn't help. I don't think I had COVID, but I had a low-grade fever. I had terrible sleep, and I had to take a rental car, and one of my friends lovingly, or actually it was pretty much a sass comment, described it as a classic mom van. So I was taking this big, I think it was a Toyota Highlander or something, and the seat was remarkably uncomfortable. So I felt like a very old, beat up person who was sick and sore back and hips. It was awful. And I'm still basically recovering from it. My voice sounds awful. But anyway, that's been my week. So it was much more fun to hear about Google Summer of Code and everybody's stuff. And anyway, that's that's what I got to say about that.
Well,
So
yeah, thank you. That's great. Yeah,
highlights of my week:
yeah,
cruising in mom van, being sick, not shooting my shot, uh, Ghost Town Hartford, and enjoying hearing about cool stuff other people are doing. So
yeah. That's that's one of the reasons why I don't like to do demos in the meetings, because I always feel like they're gonna fail, or you do like a short presentation and then you can do like a demo offline. You can like prepare for it and do like I've done a lot of virtual demos, and it's really kind of a hard thing. You do have to plan it out a little bit and make sure that it works. I mean, I've been in a lot of situations where you've had like, you set up a demo like in a classroom or something, and half the people get it and half the people don't. So you have a lot of people falling behind, and then you have to help them, and then it ties everything up. And if you do like one of these classic demos, or you just like really plan it out so that it's a simple thing, you don't have a lot of overhead where you're trying to get things to work together. That's like the classic demo that really is effective. But definitely, yeah, I think that's great that you're trying to do demos. And I've tried demo, I try to do demos and fail all the time, but I think the most effective ones are the ones you can really kind of zero in on some things that work, and make it simplify it basically, so that it doesn't. You can get it through and get the basic ideas through. But that's great that you're working on the VR stuff. I know that.
More about some of the Wii Robot stuff ahead. I think outside of the fact that in like 2 weeks I'll be going to Chicago and hopefully seeing Bradly and Avery and Jenny and some other folks. I'm kind of looking towards. I don't know how to say it. Just I want to have a bit of a simpler focus on things in my life, and I think that's happening. So, yeah, Wii Robot discussion to have. I don't think I'm going to say a lot about Wii Robot this week, but I think Brian asked me about that somewhat, and some other folks have been curious about things too, and that will. There's more to say about that, but maybe not so much today.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I know that Samantha couldn't make it. She's on vacation, but she might be interested in hearing about some of the VR stuff. So.
Now, in a lab manager sense, I know I had a few people float the ideas of doing demos, and I don't know if Sam was one of them, because I know she was on vacation.
Right.
I think Hussein mentioned something, but I think Hussein regularly has another lab meeting today.
Yeah.
Or at least said, hey, I can't. They're like, oh, I want to do something in the David Chalmers book. But then, they said they can't do it because they have some other obligation. So I don't think they're going to show up later today. But
yeah,
I guess, is there anyone else who is planning on doing a presentation today? I don't know what. I don't recall entirely at this point.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
So when did you want to do the rest of the meeting today, then, Brian?
Well, if you wanted to present on your VR stuff, and we could talk about it, and then I'm going to do some things on. I have some things to bring up, some work that I want to talk about that's up and coming. But yeah, if you want to do your VR stuff now, that'd be great.
Okay, let's. It'll be very, very, very high level and kind of oriented towards. Let's see if Gist is going to cooperate first. Okay. Wow, that was fast.
Yeah.
Too. All right, just a second. Hold on a second here. Okay. I don't have a whole lot to show, but it basically, I think I posted a somewhere in Slack. I don't know which channel, if it was Cognition Futures or the Frontier Map, but I posted. Oh yeah, I posted. I might show this really quickly, but just to kind of a slight preview of Cognition Future. I don't know, frontier map. I guess we call it for the time being. But so I put this in the Slack 6 days ago, and these are some of these things are a bit like this time. That was something I just copied from the article. I'm not going to use that format, but basically I'm setting up a bit more of a structure, and how to structure, in this case, the annotated bibliography. I'm not really sure I want to use the format where there's some particular conventions to labeling things in Obsidian that I'm either going to just have to deal with or use some slightly unappealing workarounds. In reality, if you're just making something like this for your own frontier map, it probably won't be a big deal. Yeah, like using the Z as something to keep the item down at the bottom of the list. But things are coming along here. I am fleshing out a bit more. I'm putting together a structured annotated bibliography.
Yeah.
Which is nice, something I've been doing for a while, and I don't want to show it right now, but also like slowly accumulating debates, and I may try to find a different word for them than debates, but like one of them is like the mind-body problem, and like where do you fall along your belief about how we should address the mind-body problem, like those kind of things. And what does it mean? Like Varela mentioned it in I was going through, I think it's even in chapter 4 or something of the Becoming Aware book, and they mentioned that they specifically said, the mind-body problem, which is like how do we connect the mental, cognitive, and the bodily stuff, and it's like just even just seeing, I think even this is a bit completionist, I suppose. Like if you were like gotta catch them all about it, but like even just I think it's a bit fascinating to see how different speakers refer to things, because you have like the mind-body problem or the hard problem in philosophy, and you have all these different takes on it, and sort of like I think having you could there are ways using Obsidian to kind of create your own sort of notebook about this, but it's very easy to sort of like tag, and here's what this author thinks about this thing, and have it show up in a connected way. So anyway, that's a bonus preview, and more about that later too, as always. But all right, can everybody see this?
Yes.
VR accessibility, a brief tour, a brief history of time. The formatting will probably be off because I changed some of the theme to not for privacy's sake, I suppose. But here we go. Problems, and this is something that was actually echoed both by Bradly and my supervisor somewhere else in different ways. It's kind of interesting, but basically focusing on problems first, and then what technology can address them. In this case, our target community was basically folks who have disabilities, particularly intellectual or developmental ones, which I feel like is a general take on things, but the three technologies I'm going to be focusing about today aren't necessarily super tailored to those things, but they're kind of in that realm. Lack of motor isolation, supervision, things like that. Things that disabled folks at various levels have to deal with. And an interesting thing about this again, because you'll see each of these kind of would address. Each of these is kind of a sweet spot for addressing these needs in different ways. I'm going to go back here, but like, each of these platforms has a very different set of, they offer a very different set of affordances, I would say, and they're all different complex, different amounts of complexity. So we'll be looking at Mindvr, Walk-in VR, and Cognition. Mindvr is very simple. It's a head-mounted display, and you can use an iPad or a tablet. Walk-in VR it basically requires Steam and a Kinect camera, PC VR. It's much more tech involved. And then Cognition is really advanced stuff, and I think it's like you're not gonna. I don't really see this as. I don't really know. I don't quite understand some of what they're doing, even though they sent me some material and I've seen some demos. But I feel like this is like basically customized. You're not going to be like with Walk-in VR. You can be doing some tinkering. Cognition's like really high level BCI AR integration, and I'm sure I can ask Morgan a lot of questions about that, but we'll get to that later. But for helping someone who's basically fairly functional in some ways but can't verbally speak, like it seems like a really breakthrough technology for that, and the way that it's interfacing with some other technology too. But we'll start with Mindvr. I don't know how much time we want to give to all this stuff, because I could show some of the videos, but basically you can see what Mindvr is here. You have this headset. This is a bit of an older photo, and then someone on a tablet, and it basically kind of it's designed towards seniors. Can I show this here? Yeah. This guy's super happy to be looking at what I've been looking at. But this is it right here, and I think it's a phenomenal thing for it. If you have an older adult who can't go on trips as much and wants to basically virtually tour a place and easily share it with other people, that's what Mindvr is. It's really great. Ooh, sorry about that. But you kind of see what it is. It's basically letting people explore other worlds, and it's really well done in the sense that it's very socially motivated, I would say. Like it does a great job of like connecting people, and then it creates a lot of opportunities to deal with social isolation and to create moments to experience or bond over stuff. And I think that's a really that's a great thing. Where is the their starter package is like $600. So, and that's pretty good for how do I do it for communities? That's pretty good for being something that's fairly like here for like it feels very accessible for the right community. There's not so much. I wouldn't. This isn't really maybe the least developmentally, the least disabled focus, and mostly just about age. But for someone who, it's still quite an appealing thing. And this actually has been tested out in some of the one of the groups that I'm working with has a bunch of healthcare related partners, and there's been positive reviews so far, even for those who aren't elderly, but just the fact that they could have and do some things and see some places, and even having supervision on a tablet, and it's a way to kind of have minimal. It's supervision, but it's not imposing, which is an appealing thing. So I'll go back here. There is. I originally thought there wasn't any interactivity, but they do apparently have some. You can kind of see not very well in the background, but like this person's like catching butterflies with a net, and they have these little handheld toggle things. So that is something they're working on. And they have a particular partnership with HTTP Vive, but this guy is just. I want to be him. But they have a good way of making what they're doing accessible across different devices and sharing it really easily. So that's great. Mindvr pros and cons simply very safe, very built, high sociability. You're not gonna. It's very well done for folks who don't have a lot of technical experience or know-how or comfort. People can be scared about that. Very targeted at aging senior folks. It will be pretty boring for young individuals, though. Not a lot of interactivity and basically guided tours for different areas. For the cons, but I mean, I think Mindvr totally hits. It's a product that totally hits its target, which is older folks, and making stuff interactive and giving people a chance to see and experience things. I think they actually do a great job of it. Yeah. Any questions about Mindvr? I don't really know a whole lot. I was really hoping to demo this because we had headsets, but they weren't available. So I was hoping to actually experience it, but I didn't get to experience it last week.
So the content is just guided tours. It's like you're guiding them through some simple environment, like catching butterflies or something, and it would be.
Well, it's actually very complex. Like you can go to pretty much anywhere. You can go to the International Space Station. You can go to like Paris, and you can walk around. Like it. I think they basically have like. Can I change this? Oh. Like you can go sit in on a concert. You can go on nature. It's like it'll just kind of. I don't think it's quite a live stream, but I basically think it's high quality 3D or what's the word? Video footage of real life spaces taken with the right camera to have an immersive experience.
Yeah.
They have just a whole bunch of it, and part of their you have that the initial costs of the hardware, but then they have a subscription for like $20 or $30 a month. You can keep getting new content. This person's like doing hang gliding stuff, so they have like some really intense things, which is different. It's like a big flying scroll.
Yeah.
But some of it, yeah, and someone was like, "Oh, I can't believe I'm going to." I guess he's at a museum. I can't believe I'm going to like places that they took pictures earlier in life, like someplace in Paris. Oh, I can go there and look around, and that's great. So stuff like that. Yeah, this is the every month you get new stuff, and how they have partnership with entertainment brands and yeah. So there's the
being the usual. I'm just curious about the affordances for interaction. So you have these videos and you're doing things, and you have to like manipulate something in the environment to get it to work, or you can move it around, like do the 360 panorama. You can move around the camera view. So I mean, do they make that really easy, or is that like? I mean, that's really I think the key to a lot of these VR applications is how easy is it to move.
I don't understand, and I don't know if it's like I don't know how how does the agent move throughout the world? I know that some of them had the toggles, like the handheld controllers to catch butterflies. That was specific from what I understood. The majority of these, like in this demo video, I didn't see anything like that. Like it's just strap on your headset and go. Like, don't think, just go.
Yeah.
Like what is this? What is this woman doing to affect what he's looking at? Like, I think it's basically like it's almost like you're just on a train ride and you're looking out the window and you get to control where your head looks. I think that's basically what it's like. But maybe the person I don't really know.
Yeah.
See here.
Yeah, they have the hand controllers. That's usually the thing that.
But this is just for this like butterfly stuff.
Yeah. But that's going to affect the amount of presence that you have in an environment if you can like manipulate things with a hand controller, say if you can click on things, or if you have a wand where you can like point to things, and versus just kind of like looking at images, which are, something that you could that gives you a sense of presence if you're doing it in a headset, but it's a different kind of experience, and then integrating those like selection action things, or integrating the images with like something that you're doing maybe in the physical world is really the key to some of these applications. I mean, if I had just created a really wonky application that had like, I just looked around and it wasn't well tracked, the video is kind of floating around in my field of view, that's not going to be very good. It's not going to be a very immersive experience. But if you have something that's, you can like move around, you're on the top of a mountain, you're moving around, maybe you use a hand controller to click and throw a snowball, or take a picture of something. That's something that's really immersive. So I'm just curious how they handle these different things in the environment.
Yeah, and I think I'm curious about that too. I was hoping to get some of that in the demo, and I think they're. I suspect that they have okay, so they're partnering with Stanford.
Yeah.
Virtual Human Interaction Lab. I suspect that they kind of are intentionally keeping a lot of things really, 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 really simple.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if they offered more interactivity under like very limited situations. But a lot of these are just. I think they're kind of intentionally clipping some of those opportunities. Yeah. So let's see. Okay. So up next is Walk in VR. And I'll try to go through these fairly quickly. But in short, Walk-in is this on the right. You see, I don't know if anybody's played Beat Saber. I have on Oculus, but typically you have to. Whoa, that's not what I wanted to do. Typically, you have to have you have to hold on to the controllers, the things that you put your hands in or wrap around your wrist or whatever. In short, Walk-in VR lets you use Kinect or other devices, another camera, to track your body movements and some other things too, but lets you have a much greater accessibility and removes some barriers for people who don't. If you have cerebral palsy, if you have depending on your movement needs, there's a lot of different things that they basically let you either kind of defer to someone using a controller as an assisted person, or try to augment and create sort of reduction or simulations, or I don't know the word for them. Basically, ways to get around it yourself. So I'll show you their main. This looks different. They just changed that. You know, I don't quite understand this picture, honestly, because I feel like they're using toggles there when most of them aren't. But basically, the major thing also about Mindvr is that it basically works with Steam, and you can basically use Steam games. So Steam VR, that you can use a free version on Steam to basically enhance your games, and if you want to support them, you can do other things too, or if you want to like get their special a more commercial version of this, you can do that to get off of their main stuff. I may do that soon, so they like try out their stuff, the free version of their Steam stuff, and try to use like Steam games with it. You can kind of see. I'll bring up this demo too, just to have this look later. But,
this is the standard way that Beat Saber's played.
yeah, you can if you haven't played Beat Saber, that's basically what it is.
So what if someone lacked the fine motor skills to use or to even hold on to these controllers?
Hey, Dan, can I try? Thankfully, there's a company that thought of this and found a solution for disabled gamers like myself.
Yeah, and so you kind of see from there, they go through it. The one thing, this is a little bit overkill. Like, you don't need this setup to run the game, but you will need like a Kinect and definitely one computer, like a traditional computer setup, to run the stuff. So not every like care center is necessarily going to have that or the space to do it, because a lot of like Beat Saber and stuff, you'll need space to have some arm movement, and then probably space to have like space for a caregiver who's technically savvy to assist with what's going on. Like they'll have to run Steam, they'll have to run the computer, they'll have to deal with connecting the headset and other updates like that. Some other highlights from this. Let's see here. You pretty much get this so far. Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on all this stuff. But any kind of questions about walk-in VR that I could try to answer before we move on to everything else and wrap up soon, hopefully. I would say walk-in VR is like really great at providing accessibility, particularly for those who have motor control issues. You can play real video games, so for younger folks or people who are like in that space of they have the ability to do stuff but don't have all the physical control they need to play video games in a traditional sense. It's an extremely appealing thing. It's just it would require a lot more technical savvy, and you'd have to. There's a lot more risk with it. Like there's a lot more risk compared to Mindvr, as to like what you'd be exposed to and having people around that and everything else. So yeah, but I think it's a great. I'm really impressed by walk-in VR. I think you're doing a great thing to make video games more accessible for people who need that. I will briefly cover Cognition, and then I do want to kind of talk a little bit about some things that are upcoming, like both for PlayStation 5 and also what Meta's doing. I'll conclude on those things and wrap it up. Really quickly, I think I'm just going to briefly talk about Cognition. But basically, it's sort of an augmented reality headset that's done up with a BCI, and they claim the world's first integrated brain-computer interface with augmented reality, and it basically can help you express your thoughts and put it out there in I think in a verbal and also in a physical textual way, so that someone trying to discuss with the person in the headset, which has a better way of doing it. They one of Andreas's demos basically talked about how, like, imagine if you couldn't talk. There's like the stories of people basically get either paralyzed or only they can do is move their eyes. And so how do you communicate with that? People without vision, people without speech, people without hearing. What can you do? And this is kind of designed to deal with that. There are also one really interesting thing about Cognition that I don't know a lot about, but I'm going to find where it goes, is they're pushing things forward with manipulating other external devices. This is a hand demo, like closing the hand, like closing the fingers in the hand, but also this is the best picture for this. I think this is sorry, but also they have a lot of. Oh, sorry, I think this is the wrong picture. They're apparently developing software that lets you really easily integrate with like you can get customizable keyboards on your phone, and so I think they're doing a lot of work to make interfacing with like their BCI technology, and creating ways of making really interesting mesh points of like either with some smart home devices or even just those quote unquote keyboards that you could interface with on a phone or whatever to make using devices and other external things more accessible. And that's a really interesting feature for disabled people, but also like as a cognitive enhancement in general. Like if I could interface with my phone or talk to my like Alexa or Siri or Google Smart Home or whatever, and do that through my mind. I'm curious where they're going to be going with that. But yeah, assistive care is kind of what I'm particularly curious about. But yeah, and they have two, and I don't quite understand what they are. If you want to say anything about them, you probably can, Morgan. But I don't. I'm still understanding the difference between Exus and Axon, and how much they're. I guess one of them more is wireless EEG based, but yeah.
Is it saying also the eye tracking?
This one is eye tracking. Eye tracking with the brain. Control applications and smart home devices with mental visual fixation. Eye tracking with your brain. That's the Axon, whereas the Nexus supports multiple input methods and enables person to control applications.
Yeah, we can ask Andreas.
Yeah. Okay.
But it could be as simple as the EEG.
I think yeah.
And that matches. They just did the Glia demos for AWE, some sort of AR conference, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They sent me, I believe. I forgot if her name was Jennifer, but someone from Cognition sent me like two like brochure pamphlets about these things and some other demos and stuff, which is great. But and then again, I feel like Cognition potential to be really, really great for people with speech or like communication problems. I'm really looking to see what their software and connectivity based stuff will do. But I imagine I wonder what it's like for those people who are like, if they have a lot of involuntary movement, I wonder if that's harder to deal with. Like if you're spasming a lot, like the walk in VR individual was, would it be harder for them to control some of the stuff? Maybe, I don't know. The cons are it's still in development, and I didn't even really get a clear answer about. I wasn't given a clear answer about a lot of things when I was talking to them, which is fine. I understand where they are in some process of things. It's something that I think they can. I'm sure there are ways that they'll find ways to have this be a very applicable thing in care home settings. It's just I don't really know. Yeah, there's different things to work out. I'm very curious to see where it goes, and I think I do like what they're doing with combining basically AR and BCI, and I think it's kind of a nice step towards. It feels very much like a real extended, really extending your cognitive abilities with this one, like what you can control with your mind. Yes, if you're disabled, but also like just in general sounds like a lot. So really quickly, things on the horizon. PlayStation's VR 2 headset looks to have eye tracking in it. I don't know what the latest with that. So people have heard. I've heard also there's been a lot of issues with doing eye tracking the right way, both for PlayStation and some other things. So it's like there's a big movement towards that, and how that will make certain things even more accessible and potentially powerful in general. This was as a May 2022. Eye tracking will be particularly pleasing for VR enthusiasts, but it could lead to a higher price tag, etc. So we'll see where that goes for them. And then finally, and very interesting way to think about on a few different levels, for Facebook. Quest 2 is kind of the current most accessible, popular thing that Oculus / Meta / Facebook has out there, and it's a fairly good technology, and it's accessible, and you can do Steam games, and you can do Oculus games, and you can it's a great accessible gaming headset. But what I found out, and I didn't know this until recently, their next version of it actually will not be designed for the same audience. They're calling it Project Cambria, which is Quest 3 has kind of evolved into Project Cambria, and it won't really be as much of a game console most likely. It's going to have a much higher price tag, and it may be way more designed towards doing other things in the quote-unquote metaverse, like training, fitness, crossover, business activities, trying to make it more and more accessible that you can have most of your life in a metaverse, in a completely digital environment. And so what they're doing with that in terms of eye tracking, in terms of the hardware and the software development, it may not be as focused towards the gaming stuff, which is interesting, but they're definitely, and just after, like a day after seeing this, I saw an advertisement on, like, I was watching like Amazon Prime or something, and they did an advertisement for Meta about this specific tablet that was going to let you give you like telepresence, but like virtual metaverse telepresence too. I forgot what it's called, but like seeing more and more of these little things Meta's putting out to try to make it like, oh yeah, have your business and other parts of your life totally in the metaverse. So that's the direction we're going in. So thank you. That's it. I know there's a lot of different things to talk about here, but I'll leave it at that. And yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Jesse. That was a wonderful overview of that. I think a lot of times we talk about this in the abstract, and it's nice to see like these things, these different technologies. As I said, the question's important, but the technology is also important too. And I like the last point you made about like Project Cambrian. You said that it was, they didn't want to get away from games, and they would be doing different types of, accessibility apps or training fitness, and then you need specialized hardware. And I think that was something you saw in some of the other examples where you had that specialized hardware that needed to be in place, and then the software also needs to be in place, and getting those to work together. And that's really what we're dealing with.
I feel like I don't. There's the person I'm about to mention is, I respect them. Some of their commentary is a little bit fringe, but I do like to reference them from time to time. Dan Fagella.
Okay.
He made an AI consulting company called Emerge, and he's very into like AI and economy and politics. But I'm going to use this term called substrate monopoly, and I feel like Meta is totally gunning for substrate monopoly, meaning that by which you enter the metaverse, in their case, the fully digital, player one universe. Like they are really gunning for that, and I don't think they have much competition in the holistic sense that they do, right? In the holistic sense that they can create a lot of things and also get have Yamakun on the other side of things, making like that sort of a visual first person AI take on things. Like they're gonna make some really crazy stuff, but we'll see where it goes.
So, sorry, what did Yamakun say?
Oh, I mean, just I was just referencing Jan's like quest to get a bunch of first person video and try to have using like video self-supervised learning and stuff like that. I feel like Jan's quest for that versus like, I don't know, Zuckerberg's quest for getting the hardware out there so everybody lives in their virtual mind, and then all of Facebook's tremendously creepy amounts of personal data they have, like that's going to be a fearsome force.
Yeah.
When they put that together with that. But, yeah. Anyway, we can move on. I feel like I've kind of.
Yeah, I think we brought it up a while back, but there's been a lot of work on like first person like video or camera views and using machine learning techniques to sort of sort through that and stitch that into a world view, so you have like different camera views of the world, and you can go through that and you can analyze it and put it together. And they're using that, I think, for AI for like agents, but that's also very useful for VR in terms of getting different views of the world. Like you show those 360 videos where you're taking all these camera views and you're stitching them together, and then you can navigate it after the fact. So you're viewing the scene and you're walking around the scene and you have all these views that are consistent. So it's giving this illusion that you're in a space that's not there. It's kind of like a representation of it. And so, I think a lot of that is going to become important too, is like rendering video scenes and other types of things that are, put together in a way that's seamless to the person on the other end. And that's one of the, so I asked that question about like stimuli and how do you interact with it? Because, if you can't interact with it, it's kind of limiting. If you can interact with it, but it's not seamless, it's limiting. But if you can put those together, it's...
Yeah. Yes. Excuse me.
It is also, with the Mayo suite, there's the Mayo challenge, but it was following up with the Mayo challenge and the I think it was continual learning. Continual learning vision. I think that's the challenge project that has this like 5,000 hours of egocentric video. Is that
Yeah.
So there's some interesting work in the kind of like developmental psychology in terms of because doesn't Tenenbaum also have one of his colleagues, didn't they strap a GoPro on a baby? Right? Yeah,
I think so.
I forget what the name of that data set is.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. I don't know what it is, but it sounds
Yeah, I don't know. Well, thank you again, Jesse. That was great. And we'll follow up on that maybe in later meetings. And I know I've been talking about getting the VR stuff going, but it's been very, very slow moving. But it's not bad because we can think about it a little bit more deeply. So
I think the next steps for this have to do with like this is kind of again this as you can tell the presentation that I made was not tailored towards the lab. It was tailored towards another audience. So it's a little bit out of place, but I think the next step would be kind of looking at basically we look at what Tenenbaum's done. I really want to look more at what Shamaro's been using in his because I actually haven't I got a reply specifically to Shamaro. Well, not reply, but I reached out to him saying, hey, can I send you an email about some stuff? And he was like, yeah, do that. So I have to send him an email, and then also they I forget what it's called, but I think it's at Cincinnati, right?
yeah.
There was a whole like research group's web page that his stuff was under, but like it was down. So I have to check on that web page again. I actually emailed like the webmaster or whatever supervisor of that thing. Like, oh yeah, we're alive and well. We're still doing our stuff, but our web page is down. It's like, okay. So I think the next step will be finding things that are a little bit more like, all right, like in a more research academic-y way. Because that was all very like end user situationally focused with that, and so kind of maybe the same presentation that's focused like, oh, here's what Shamaro's doing in his lab with space synergies. That'd be a cool thing to do next, obviously. Yeah. And that would probably further some things with what we need to do for the Wii Robot stuff too. So more about that. That'll be the next iteration, perhaps, ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, okay. Well, thank you. Now I want to move on to some other things. I said that we talk about maybe some future, like kind of things that following up on different things and talking about some of the things we have in the future coming up. So let me share my screen. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was we've been talking about this, and I wanted to bring this talk up because I didn't know if a lot of people have seen it. I know that Amanda has not seen it, and I doubt that. Like, I know Jesse was at this talk. I gave this talk at it was the Philosopher's Web Cafe, and they wanted me to give a talk, and so I gave this talk on observer-dependent models. And this talk is about it's about a year and a half old now. So I've had a lot more thoughts about this, and but this is a nice slideshow because it kind of goes over some of the things about like observers and systems and agents, and I'm using these agents as stand-ins. So you can see this agent here. We have I'm using some Pac-Man references here, but I have like 4 agents, and I use these little images, and they're kind of conceptual agents. Like there's what I call morphogenetic agent, there's a Bratenberg vehicle, there's a genotype to phenotype agent where you have like a genetic algorithm or a genotypic representation down here and a phenotypic representation up here, and they're these different levels. and then a morphogenetic agent with a visual envelope. So I'm not going to get into what those mean, but those are the 4 classes of agent that I kind of use as a demonstrative tool in this talk, and kind of going through some of these things, talking about internal regulation, internal representation, going back into the literature, and talking about scale and how observers view the world, and get into this idea of like a black box mechanism. So a black box is where the observer sees the world and they don't really know what's going on in it. It's a black box. They can manipulate things and see them change, but they have no idea what the mechanisms are. But then there's also what they call a gray box, which is where you have a limited knowledge of what the mechanisms are. Not full knowledge, but a limited amount of knowledge. And so if I have this planet and I'm an observer, I can do things to the planet and it'll have an effect. And I kind of know why that is, but I don't clearly know what the mechanism is. And so those kind of gray boxes are interesting because they allow you to think about feedback and the effects of like an action and its response, and some issues of causality. So I'm not going to get too much into that because again, like I said, we need to think a little bit more about this. But so there's the white box, black boxes, and then there are these gray boxes. So these different colored boxes basically mean how opaque the system is. And, we have this feedback, so we manipulate something. We get feedback through our senses. We process it in our brains, in our internal model of that thing, changes. And then we do some more manipulation and resampling of that world, that thing we're manipulating in the world, and then we're getting it back, getting a sensory feedback coming back. So this is a process you can model with agents. There's also the Gibsonian information work that's going on in the lab, and that's basically the idea that there are things in the environment that are coming into the agent that you're basically sampling sensory information in the world, but that there's some distribution to it. So this planet, for example, there's a distribution of sensory information. If I view the planet, I know it's a sphere. I know it has land masses and water, and that's all sort of in a distribution. And it's not, like a Gaussian distribution. It's not a blur in front of me. There's structure here. So there may be affordances. There may be statistical affordances, which would be these, clusters. So the land occurs in clusters. And those are statistical affordances that I can use to interpret what's going on with the world, especially if I manipulate it. If I, put my finger in the ocean, I can create a ripple, or, through the ocean, I can create a tidal wave. And so knowing that you stick your finger in the ocean and you can do that, but the land, it's a little bit different. There, maybe a shock wave, but it's not it doesn't behave in the same way. And I'm being silly here because this is like the agent actually manipulating a globe. But you can see the effect, cause and effect. That causes, the feed forward signal. The effect is the feedback signal. And then that's this environmental information. And then there's some internal model in the agent that models this and tries to catch up with the action in the world. So this is one thing that I covered in this talk. Talked about Gibsonian information. This was kind of a collection of different ideas that I was presenting to this audience. Some things about intersubjectivity in different groups of agents, collective agents, and some of the things about collective behavior here. But this is the thing I wanted to get at, I think. Yeah, this one. So in the Google Summer of Code group, we talked about collective agents and collective behavior. And I think it was, Brian was giving his Pass the Peas demo, and I had mentioned that, what happens when you have different views of the same thing. So like Brian's demo, Passing the Peas, was like this circle where you had different agents sitting around a table, and they were passing food around the table. And so they were passing peas. You could pass mashed potatoes or whatever. And the idea is you want to see who has the peas and where they need to pass them. So every agent has a viewpoint on that space, right? It could be like, let me see if I can do this on my board here. Just to give you an idea of what I'm thinking here. So, you have a table, a circular table, you have agents sitting around the table. And of course, the idea is, they all have sort of a perspective on the space. If I'm this agent, I'm looking out in this direction. I can see these other agents and what they're doing, but I have a perspective on it. At a certain, I have a certain angular view of their action. So, you can imagine that this agent over here, if I'm this agent here, and I'm watching this agent, observing them, I have a slightly different angle on their activities than I have of this agent here, which is across the table. And I don't know if this is really important for passing the P's or not, but imagine if you had to figure out depth cues, or you had to figure out you couldn't see their face, your full face. You could see the side of their body, but not their face. This is important for social cues and things like that. But the idea would be that you have this circle of agents. They're all observing each other, and they're able to see different perspectives on themselves. Another way to think about this is if an agent is in an environment, and they're looking out at different things in the environment, and there are these different objects. There are different qualities and shapes, and you get a certain perspective on it. So like this triangle, you have a face forward view here. If you're this agent over here in the distance, you get a different view of this triangle. So you get these different views of the same object. Now, if you're behaving collectively, you're going to report back to the group what you see. And so in this case, you're all sitting in a circle. You all see each other. You have full information of the observations, but not entirely, because you don't, like I said, you have different views on each of these agents. So this agent you might be able to see under the table, but they're passing under the table. This agent you might not. So this agent might be able to hide something under the table that this agent cannot. And so this makes it interesting. Not only do you know kind of basic information about your neighbors, but you have hidden information that you can see for some neighbors and not others. Now, everyone's going to have some piece of that private information. So if they pull that private information, they have full information about the group, what the group's doing sort of in public and what they're doing kind of surreptitiously. And this kind of creates an interesting situation in that you could have like a circle of people, a pass the P circle, where you're surveying everyone about their, where they think the P's are, where they're going, what direction they're being passed. So the idea was that they're passing the dish either right or left, and you have to ascertain that or predict that. But let's say that, it's like I'm hiding money under the table, or I'm hiding money somewhere. Which agent is most likely to have it? Where are they moving it to another agent? Are they colluding? What are what are the dynamics there? It's even more interesting when you start integrating the information, and you make a survey and you say, okay, everyone at the table, what do you think? What do you think about your neighbors? What are they doing? What are they going to do next? And so having a global state reference of that is important, because you can have these local reference for each individual agent, but having this global information is also important. And that's integrating everything from every agent and having a full view of everything. In this case, where you're navigating in space, these two agents have distinct views of this object. So this agent agent A will be able to report on this side of the triangle, and this agent B will be able to report on this side of the triangle. It's kind of like having space probes on either side of the moon, because the moon doesn't rotate on its axis. You can't see the far side of the moon unless you have a probe on the other side to see it. So you have two probes, one on the near side of the moon, one on the far side of the moon. And they communicate with each other or with a ground base to tell what they see on each side. And those sides are radically different due to the nature of the moon not rotating on its axis. So having that information being complementary is very important. Now, if I go back to this presentation, we talked about this in terms of what we call viewpoint networks. And this is an idea I've been working out. I haven't worked on it in a while, but this is something. So this is isometric projection, this image here. It's where you have a two-dimensional sketch of like these boxes that are nested together. And you see the isometric projection, the way you draw it, is that it's the two-dimensional object, but it looks three-dimensional. So you have these three-dimensional affordances in it. So you have an XYZ coordinate system in terms of affordances, but it's just a flat picture. And so these agents are now looking at this thing from different viewpoints, and they're getting different information. So this agent might be able to look into this tube, which isn't a tube, but it has the affordances of a tube. And then this agent will look straight on to the rest of the network of objects and see sort of this global view on this side, but they won't be able to see this side here. So it's a little bit, the information isn't complete. And then this agent will be able to see maybe they'll be able to detect that this isn't actually a tube. It just has the affordances of a tube. So you have all these agents, and they're viewing this object from different directions, and they're integrating their information. They have local information, but they also have this global information that's useful. Now, in this case, we can formalize this. An agent A takes a vantage point V on a projected geometric object that forms this graph G. So this is a graph of, that it's an isometric projection. So it's a graph in this two-dimensional space that forms these three-dimensional affordances. You get these tubes, which are these recesses. You get these blocks, these steps here, which are just like different, shapes that are arranged in a certain way. But they give you this information. And so this agent can view from a certain vantage point. Things may look like a pair of stairs from one vantage point. They may not look like a pair of stairs from another vantage point. And so getting the agents to agree on this, or to bring up these these complementary pieces of information, is important. So for population A, each A sub n takes a particular viewpoint. So each agent A sub n takes a particular viewpoint, resulting in a heterogeneous set of perspectives, and those can be either integrated or not integrated and be complementary or even contradictory. If you see things that you don't understand that this is an isometric view, say we don't really understand isometry in our culture, we want to know like what this is, we can see these two different perspectives, and now we have to reconcile them and say, what is this thing we're looking at? What is this phenomenon? And then it comes to be that, this is a two-dimensional object that we can view as a three-dimensional object. Great. And again, they're integrating their information, but then you can get more interesting. And this is a Super Mario Mobius strips. This is a Mobius strip that someone made. I think it's like 3D printed. It's a Super Mario Brothers world that's kind of like, in the video game, it's like a loop. So you go from one scene to another, and they've printed all this out on this Mobius strip. The nice thing about a Mobius strip is that it's a curved surface that has a curve that makes it continuous. So the action is continuous around it, but it's very topologically complex. And so you can view this Mobius strip from different perspectives. You can actually see little slices of the world, and they look kind of like they're two and a half dimensional. They have some curvature. But if you look at the whole Mobius strip, you see it's a much more complex topology. And so again, this is where this local information and this global information get integrated, and they give you different pieces of information that are maybe very important in understanding what you're looking at or what you're analyzing. And so this is an agent's view of one part of this Mobius strip. You see it's like the game world, but it's curved, but you wouldn't know it's a Mobius strip unless you've sampled every part of it or enough parts of it that you can put this together. And so you can have these conceptually connected subspaces. Here you can see this. I put it into a phase space where you have 3 dimensions, and it's these connected subspaces that can be utilized in different ways. And then, so yeah, this just kind of goes over what each observer is doing. They have these unique perspectives. You can have differential learning, so you can learn, differently depending on the viewpoint. or you can put the information together and get more out of it. With the super additive effect, you can get more out of it than you would have if you would have just walked around the image and taken shots of different places, because the agents are sort of embedded in that viewpoint, and they're doing this simultaneously, and so they're all, and I think about this like not just in terms of agents. That's something else. I'm not going to get into that yet. But you're thinking about it in terms of like camera views and viewing things in virtual reality. We have these different camera views. We have a lot of different types of nice high quality camera now. We can embed in different parts of the environment. And so you can see different viewpoints simultaneously. You can stitch the information together. You can get, really interesting scenes assembled that way. But also those scenes are telling us different things. And they're going to, I think, if we think about this a little bit more, if we're viewing objects that are kind of, if we're viewing like landscapes, it's pretty straightforward. You see a landscape, you can rotate your head around it. But if you're like, say, in the middle of a room that's cylindrical, like a chamber that's cylindrical and it has a lot of things on the wall, or you're maybe in a sculpture of one of these isometric networks, and this was actually a three-dimensional sculpture in the world, or it was just a two-dimensional image that I've crafted so that it looks like a three-dimensional image. There are a lot more questions about an environment like that. So, these are things that we can use in the real world as opposed to just kind of a theoretical exercise. But also, we can program agents to do these things, and it's kind of an interesting direction. And so, future directions, we can actually think about like the epistemology of clusters and other types of natural groups and natural types and how to represent those. And we have this tool, Contextual Geometric Structures, that we work on in the group. We haven't worked on it in a while, where you try to represent the full range of features for a certain space. So this is a color space, CKMY color space, and you're representing all possible combinations of this color space. And then you look at how an agent utilizes this space. What parts of the space do they explore? And the idea is that if you start utilizing different parts of the space, or all of the space, this is a distinct cultural tradition that the agent is following. So agents can be specialized to exploit things in the CK axis or this MY axis, and then having this geometric representation of this to fall back on as a common reference point is sort of like a cultural universal, or it's a way to like stitch all this together across agents and across cultural traditions. So this is kind of a really dense talk when I gave it, but I wanted to highlight some of those issues because I think they might be useful for thinking about like a lot of the things that we've talked about in the group.
What is the use of natural on that last slide? Like, what is the epistemology, for example, of natural groups? Like, what is meant by nature in this kind of framework?
Well, I guess it's just how they're kind of defined, ontologically in the world, maybe like physics, or like color space has you can create sort of a color space of these different attributes. So CKMY is different physical attributes to it, and when combined they create these colors that you can see with your eyes. And some people see different types of, they give them different names, but that's not the important part. The important part is the physical phenomena of the color, and so interpreting that color is the part that's sort of the cultural diversity there. But the natural part is the part where you have the physical stimuli that convert into some sort of thing that you can interpret with language.
I was also curious, at some point it sounded like maybe you were saying that, so the importance of the global state, of a global state reference,
yeah,
does that ever get encoded into, well, that's not the question I want to ask. I guess I just want to clarify, I thought I heard at one point that we could program an agent to kind of go around and compile the perspectives of all of the other agents. Okay, I did hear that right.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. I never
Yeah.
thought of that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think you need a super agent. I mean, it's like more of like I can take everything an agent is seeing right now and put it into a representation. What isn't is agent independent, but it's like every agent is seeing this thing right now. It's like if I took a camera, if I had everyone wear a camera in the group, and you walked outside your house and you're in different places in the world, and I said, look out the street, look around, and I'm going to see all these different views, and then I'm going to try to infer maybe what the properties of like the world are from that. Like, oh, that okay, there's the sun, there's clouds, there are other houses, other people. You know, it's a very rudimentary thing, but you have all these different perspectives. You're thinking about more in context. If you had like an object, like I was talking about, like maybe a three-dimensional object where you have different perspectives on it, you're just really at that point you're just taking this super representation of the object, but you're getting different perspectives on it. So it's not like you're building a representation of a sculpture and saying these are the properties. You're building a representation sort of organically, and you're saying, okay, if from this angle it looks like this, from this angle it looks like that. You might see some visual illusions that you have to dispel with another point of view, or you see like a property that maybe you can confirm with another point of view, or you can see that there's like a curvature where otherwise you wouldn't be able to see that if you had an agent that traveled around the object and saw like, okay, well, that's, you know, one side, the other side. If you had two different perspectives, you could actually see maybe that there's a curvature, that there's a comparison. It's kind of like how they confirmed relativity, general relativity. They said, you know, we're going to look at like how light bends from a source object, and we'll you know, kind of and analyze it that way. And but this is the kind of thing that, you know, I don't know what the actual application is, but it's definitely something that you can, you know, it's a different way of thinking about it than just saying we're going to look at all data and we can exploit the population of agents to do these things.
So it's interesting to think about those in terms of the simulations that like the neural MMO and M-agent simulations, like imagining them passing their perspectives, and you know, I don't see that in a lot of the simulations.
Yeah. Okay. We had some comments in the chat. Jesse said, Brian, will your next demo of the potluck involve bad actors who want to steal food or are only sharing under the table? Which is, you know, that's like there's a whole literature on like deceptive information. Like you keep public information, keep private information. If you're gambling, if you're playing like poker, there's a lot of private information you don't want to share with other people. You have a state, you know when you're gonna like go broke, right? But then your competitors want to know. They try to infer that state. So they're like, is this person, you know, look at their face, and you know, sometimes you can tell and sometimes you can't. But that's private information versus public information. It's very different, and it's very useful to have that, you know, distinction because sometimes the problem warrants it. But Brian then said, that's so interesting. I had started to consider that. At the moment, I'm mostly excited about learning to make ABMs and to apply different computational frameworks to those ABMs. And the idea of bad actors is something worth considering. Well, I think it's not just to spice things up. I think that in your, you know, when you're talking about open source contributors, there are bad actors. You get malicious people, or you get people who free ride, meaning they just do things without contributing, or there's all sorts of they are not necessarily bad actors. They're just not like rowing in the same direction. They're kind of like, you know, I want to use the software but not contribute to it. Now, if everyone does that, of course the software won't work. You know, it dies. But the whole purpose of open source is to say people are going to contribute to this thing that they're using. So it works at cross purposes of the thing that we're trying to do. So it's bad actors is actually kind of an important thing. it's just kind of hard because there's a literature in like game theory on it, and there's literature in economics on it. But that's one perspective on it. And if you could have your own perspective on it, and it would probably be right. I don't know. Like, I don't know how applicable the economics literature is to what you're doing, but
it's interesting. The literature I've been reading in terms of reinforcement learning, at least, has emphasized an adversarial aspect to training, a necessity, or certainly a power, and so there's lots of these Bob and Alice scenarios where Bob is training Alice, or basically Bob is coming up with the environment for Alice, and Alice is coming up with the environment for Bob. And you've got this adversarial relationship in terms of like tailoring the environment to bring out the most in that agent, or so it's some interesting things. I can drop a link for UCL Dark, I think is the name of the lab. It's like decision action R and K.
Yeah.
But they, So they one of these actor. It's not an actor critic. It's actor trainer. But it's called Paired. Yeah, that's the lab. That's the lab. But again, just thinking about the multi-agent reinforcement learning as being a separate, or certainly what I'm getting from the literature is like it's a separate problem, and the training. Well, and so we've talked about this a little bit, Bradly, just in terms of the kinds of environments, but these procedurally generated worlds seem to be really important to the training phase, right? So it's like we're essentially making a complete K through 12 training, in that part of the power of the procedurally generated worlds is like this staging, like you can say like make 10% of the territory behave like this, and then make it now 20% and 30%, anyway, just thinking about these things, and in particular the really big simulations of societal level simulations where the agents have each is possibly can express itself differently because of training opportunities and randomization and things like that.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to ask something I've been working with in my really simple model is, where does the global information live? Does it belong to the model? Do agents have access? And if so, is it still agent based at that point? For example, in a model, like in a multi-agent reinforcement learning situation, is there kind of a point at which you have to say, okay, agents don't have access to this global information, and that's going to make our model a lot more realistic or accurate?
I'm not too familiar with this, but I know that people do things with world models, and that's something that but I don't know how those actually work with respect to this problem. So it's like, you're storing all the global information, and my answer would be like, it would be stored sort of in a all encompassing knowledge base that agents would have to draw from, much like they try to discover the secret of life or something. You can set it up any way you want, but I'm just saying, like, that's one way to think about it, you know.
Yeah, the agents, the Julia paper on agents was kind of interesting in the sense that, like, it gave you a certain perspective on, like, what's hard about implementing this, right? And I got the feeling that there was a real, or certainly one of the issues with that global is kind of like the concurrency, like who's got that information and when are there, you know, and how are they able to act on it before potentially, you know, another agent is, right? So that was, but I wanted to just push, since you mentioned this, push the AI economist again, because I think to some degree, this is someone who's put together a couple layers of, you know, like has a couple layers of complexity beyond these that is kind of interesting, and of course the biggest. I mean, he's using this grid worlds. You know, he's you know, it's got a lot of that infrastructure in place. That's really nice. But the main thing is that, like, his policymaker, or there's this other entity that certainly has more global information, but that it emphasized that the agents can, like, when the policymaker changes, that the agents, like, immediately, you know, will start to learn and respond to that. And they wanted to make sure that there was that it was very closed loop, or that those were dynamic.
Yeah.
You know, that like, you know, to put it in their language, you know, if the tax policy changes, the agents should respond by switching to a more tax efficient strategy. And that would be important, and was something that was missing from previous models.
Have you talked
I
about?
think there's a lot. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Now finish.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I know the economic language can be somewhat distracting, but I think there's a lot in the AI Economist project that is actually really, you know, is more generally useful. You know, yeah. and you know, and economic behavior is you know, the original work on this linked games and economic behavior together. So I think of it as just a you know, they've implemented a nice game.
Yeah, we talked about this with respect to changing worlds. Like, you know, Brian brought this up. Like, what happens when the objectives change over time? Like, you know, things change, technologies change, or what you're doing changes entirely. So, what do you? I mean, this is something, yeah, you have to deal with and to figure out how to do that. So, yeah.
And is a you know, fundamental problem with the current you know, machine learning approaches, yeah. Right? I mean, this is what was so great to follow. You know, this open science group, Continual AI, in the sense that, like, you can see them working on some of these kinds of problems, right? Like, you know, so the talk this week from Continual AI, or you know, hosted by Continual AI, right, was from the Oxford group, with Sam Kessler, talking about the differences in of interference and forgetting. So, but you know, the problem being, if my agent, you know, my trained agent is still in the world, which, you know, hopefully they are, then, you know, how are they incorporating new information, right?
Yeah.
And you know, definitely more of the kind of Ken Stanley open-endedness work too, in terms of like, what about when the task isn't so clear? So basically, your representation of the task is going to be changing, or literally the task is changing. And I in going along, I've definitely seen some things that have made me think of your task switching work. Because I mean, the agents really, I mean, that's another, again, like, criticism that's very appropriate, is that too many systems are trained for one task, right? And then what about agents that you want to have be multitaskers? Again, like all of these techniques then require modifications, serious modifications.
Yeah. Hello, Erin. Hi. Nice for you to join us. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to finish up with a couple things here. The first is that I wanted to point out that I was revisiting this stuff. This is the Hard to Define Events workshop that I held with some colleagues about 10 years ago. It's actually the 10th anniversary of this. And so the idea is that we have all these different things in the world, like the occurrence of rare events or changing representations or other types of things. And about 10 years ago, we decided to put together this workshop at ALife 2012, which is a conference, the Artificial Life Conference that year. And it was a workshop on these hard to define events. And so this paper, and I can make it available in the Slack, is just a summary of this workshop and some of the talks that went on back in 2012. And it's kind of interesting, just kind of put together some talks, had some interviews of people on different topics that might be, what was sort of hard to define in their research. I want to revisit this over the next over the summer in the meetings, but it's kind of like one of these things where I'm trying to dust off all this old work and trying to get it back together. But I found this, actually, I had wanted to publish this, but I never got around to publishing it at the time, and it just kind of drifted off. But this is, so I have this on the Synthetic Daisies blog. I have a summary of sort of the workshop and some of the follow-up, and I have this paper here, and I can put this in the Slack. Basically, it's like this whole connected set of things that are, it's basically about scientific epistemology. So, we think of like science as being exact and easy to define things, but it's actually a lot of work to define like variables and models. And as you can tell, we spend a lot of time on that. This is about things that are purposefully or maybe inherently hard to define, hard to get a precise definition of. And so there are all sorts of things like, different types of, like measurement variables, different types of phenomena, like things that are very rare in nature that you can't really observe easily, concepts that are very slippery by nature. We talk a lot about, feedbacks and these sort of autopoietic systems where they're generating things as there's feedback, and you can't really maintain a static state. Well, all those really fall into this set of categories. So I'm going to revisit this over the summer because it's kind of the 10th anniversary of this. And I have to say, these ideas at the time were very untalked about in the literature. And now people are talking about this more. One good example is in the machine learning literature, people talk about out of distribution phenomena. So that's where, you have things and you train a model, there's a distribution of things in the model, but then you encounter things in the world that are outside that distribution. Now, if you think about that, that's a hard to define event for the AI because it doesn't know where to categorize the thing it's encountering. So, there are all sorts of things like that in the world. And so this is just kind of a celebration of that. But I'll come back to that maybe in the coming weeks. I think I'll finish off with this paper here. And this is a paper, this is the one that Morgan shared in the Slack. And there's a GitHub repository goes along with this. I think it's either in the Dev AI channel of the Slack or the Breitenberg Vehicles channel of the Slack or both. But this is...
Dev AI.
What was that?
Dev AI.
Dev AI, okay. So this is a group that they're at Indiana University, and they're interested in this developmental AI approach. So they're approaching this more from a sort of a developmental ethology approach. So they point out that collective behavior is widespread across the animal kingdom. To date, however, the developmental and mechanistic foundations of collective behavior have not been formally established. So they're looking at learning mechanisms in newborn animals. And there's a lot in the ethology literature about like development that I don't think we've talked about too much in the group. We've talked about developmental psychology. We've talked about developmental biology. We've talked about maybe like, serial acquisition. We've not really talked about some of these things that you see in animal behavior. And so there are a lot of things like imprinting, like Nico Tinbergen, who's an ethologist, did a lot of work on this, and there are other people as well where they did work on looking at how, newborn ducks imprint on their parent, and, there are things like this. So there are a lot of lessons we can learn, and I've said this before, this area is like wide open. There's a lot we can learn from development. In this case, they use a twin mechanism, or they use a twin sort of approach to get an accounting of this sort of the development of these behaviors. So they use deep reinforcement learning as one approach, and they use something called curiosity-driven learning. So, deep reinforcement learning is where you're reinforcing some behavior. You're saying this is good or this is bad. Okay, you use policies to do this, but in development, you probably can intuit at least that that's a major form of like learning for like babies or young children. They have to learn, if the stove is hot, don't put your hand on it, and what the consequences are for it. But also, curiosity-driven learning drives the juvenile to put their hand on the stove in the first place. So you have to explore your world, and then you have to learn the limits of the world. And so that's what they're doing here. So they're building these newborn artificial agents. They're developing collective behavior through these two different mechanisms. Like newborn animals, our agents learn collective behavior from raw sensory inputs in naturalistic environments. So they actually use virtual environments. They have these agent-based models. I was showing it in yesterday's meeting. They have these agent-based models in a virtual environment that is, has like these points of view. So you can look at it from the top-down view, which is like where you have the agents on a grid, or you can look at it from like agents looking at each other and having an egocentric perspective on everyone else. So you can see that, maybe there's an agent near you versus far away from you. You can see what the agent is doing, if it's sideways or if it's facing you. You can see its face, its emotional state, its, movement. So these are all things that are important, especially in development, because you're learning how your other fellow agents are behaving. And so that's an important piece of input. So you have all these raw sensory inputs. You have these naturalistic environments, these virtual environments. The agents also learn collective behavior without external rewards, using only intrinsic motivation or curiosity to drive learning. Specifically, when we raise our artificial agents in natural visual environments with group mates, this is the case where they're in this three-dimensional environment and they're looking at each other. They have these egocentric views of each other. The agents spontaneously develop ego motion, object recognition, and a preference for group mates, rapidly learning all the core skills required for collective behavior. So they're doing all these things that they're learning how to behave collectively through this sort of observation. So the observation, the point of view is actually important here for learning all these associated skills. So, and sometimes, even object recognition. We think about embodiment as having a body, but having a body that's embedded in a social group is actually seemingly important for object recognition and things like that. So, what I just talked about in the last section of the meeting is vindicated here. This work bridges the divide between high-dimensional sensory inputs and collective action, resulting in a pixels to actions model of collective animal behavior. So this is where, I guess, pixels to actions is where you're going from this agent-based model where you have their pixels representing the agents to these actions of the agents in an embodied way. More generally, we show that the two generic learning mechanisms, deep reinforcement learning, curiosity-driven learning, are sufficient to learn the collective behaviors from unsupervised natural experience. So, we don't want to, the whole point of using development as an inspiration is that you're trying to do things that are unsupervised. You don't really want to supervise the agent. There's some supervision in terms of the policies and sort of telling it what not to do, but largely you want the agents to be exploratory and to learn things spontaneously without worrying about linguistic labels too much. And so this is one of the things that they're able to do with this model, is to do this sort of spontaneous learning. So they kind of get into what collective behavior, so they're thinking about this in terms of schools of fish and flocks of birds and human crowds. And of course, those are all, they have that collective behavior. Now, there are differences in collective behavior between like these sorts of what we might call emergent collectives, like schools of fish and flocks of birds, where you have a bunch of them behaving in a certain way. Locally, they're doing things, and then globally you see these patterns. So flocks of birds, you'll see a pattern like a V formation, or in schools of fish, you'll see like a cloud of fish that kind of change their orientation in a coordinated manner. Those types of sort of emergent behaviors may be very distinct from something like just a bunch of people working collectively on a problem, or even like the Pass the Peas simulation where they're just trying to coordinate their behavior and solve a problem. So these are different things, of course, but they kind of talk about this very generally. So they kind of get into Tinbergen's 4 questions, which is a framework that I can talk about in more detail later. But basically, it's the idea that there are 4 questions you can ask of behaviors. One is, what function does the behavior serve? So it's a functional view. 2 is, what is the phylogeny of the behavior, or what is the evolutionary origin of the behavior? 3, what mechanisms support the behavior? So that's a mechanistic view. And then 4, what does the behavior develop over the life? How does the behavior develop over the lifetime of the individual? So this is a developmental thing. So there's evolution, development, function, and mechanism. And so those are all the things that we want to ask of a behavior. And this goes back to, ethology, where they're looking at animal behavior, and they have this black box or maybe this gray box of animal behavior. They maybe kind of know what the mechanisms are, but they have no real idea how this unfolds. And so all these questions are relevant to understanding the mechanisms, not just in that organism, but throughout the species of that animal. And then, its development from an egg or from a hatchling. Or I think in the case of Tinbergen, they're hatchlings, but they're other, they're just, it's an interesting way to look at it because it's a very comprehensive view. And so I don't know if they have any images of the pixels to action model, but here we go. This is this is like where you have the world model and actor network. This is the agent. So you have actions and observations.
All right, well, yeah, there.
Okay. Are you okay? Yeah. This is okay. So this is an image of the agents in this sort of virtual environment where they have egocentric views. So this agent will see all these agents as from an egocentric view. They'll see some agents are farther away than others, and they'll see their position, they'll see their body language, and their face doesn't really have an expression, but you can see that there's more information than just kind of like a typical agent-based model. And then finally, I don't know if we can get any further into this. This just kind of shows, okay, this shows the angle and intensity of these different views. So you see a front face view, the side view, and the back view. There are differences in the illumination, intensity, and angle. So these are different pieces of information from different points of view. And so this is in figure 3. So you can see that there isn't a lot of difference in these agents necessarily, but you can imagine that you could design a model where you have objects that have very different properties with these different angles and intensity of viewpoints. So I think that was a very fortuitous overview of that paper because I was just talking about this sort of thing. So
yeah, I love that paper, just in terms of its ideas on trying to do simulated animal mythology.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the paper that you posted. I think like the acronym's VAME, but it's from the Open Behavior Group, and it's like they want to make agents that if you had cameras on them, you would get the behavioral tracking that would demonstrate that they had learned this kind of collective flocking, right?
Yeah.
And this is also like really along the lines of the neurorobotics effort as part of Human Brain Project, or the European Human Brain Project. I mean, in the sense of having they've got lots of rat simulations where the rat is in this virtual, the VR world is an experimental psych lab, and it's all about basically getting making an agent that behaves like a lab animal.
Yeah.
And then seeing what you can do with it, and then sort of related to something that Hussein has brought up, at least with the neuroinformatics, the big benefit to this, it's like the simulations might still lack a certain complexity, but that they give you this incredible interpretability when it's like, okay, I'm using these 4 rules and able to get these kinds of emergent behaviors and things. Really good stuff. And follow up on the Wood Lab website, because they've got a lot of papers that are in press too, as well as you can see more videos and their setup and things.
Yeah, the videos are so cool.
All right, well, that's it for today. I just want to make sure, if you have any other questions, but we can also follow up in Slack. So, okay. All right, have a good week. Thank you.